Yeah, thanks for all your interesting points and the discussion. I hope you had some good discussions also in the breakout rooms, despite of some issues with Miro potentially. But what is the key here is that quite often some teams treat refinement like a meeting when it is not, but it's not a meeting but more a process. And to explain this, and I think that Pavel, are you ready for? Yeah, you already started. You already started. To explain this, there's this well-known pyramid or triangle model of the product backlog that I think was created by Mike Cohn, and it looks like this. With at the top of your backlog, you have all the small items that are ready for the sprint. They are small and clear enough to fit the iteration. And then a bit further down the backlog, you have the larger items that still need some conversations. And at the bottom, you have the large ideas that you plan to implement later or maybe never, who knows. Now, what is called a refinement is an act of taking an item like this and clarifying it. In a process of discussing items like this, you might want to break them down into smaller items. And you need to know if this is something that will take you a week or a year to implement. So you must also estimate it in some lightweight manner. In result, you might also notice that some things need to be moved around in your backlog. So it needs to be reordered. And as you know, in reality, new ideas come and go. So you add and you might remove them as well. All of this is the purpose of having the refinement in the first place. You want to do it in just in time manner. So you probably want to avoid spinning your wheels in place and preparing for something that might be implemented in a year or two, as in that time, reality will be different. So coming back to the original statement that the backlog refinement is not a meeting, you can also see that in the Scrum guide where it says on the purpose that product backlog refinement is an ongoing process in which the product owner and the development team collaborate on the details of product backlog items. That's also why it says that teams usually spend around 10% of their capacity on this activity, but it's not a strict rule and it doesn't need to be a meeting either as such.
If we go from the purpose of the product backlog refinement of breaking items down, estimating, clarifying, and reordering the backlog as a whole, adding things, removing things, because as you probably know, saying no is a very important skill of a product owner. Reordering items, you can use many techniques to do that, and probably something that you can start with, if you don't want to treat refinement like a simple meeting where everyone sits and just one person shares the screen and everyone is talking about what's visible on the screen, you can try different divergent merge options. So you can ask everyone to think alone in silence about the story at hand that you're refining, and then collect feedback from that. For example, acceptance criteria. What would people write as acceptance criteria? Or you can create pairs of developers or developer, tester, whatever roles you have in your teams, hopefully not too many. So development team members can create pairs and discuss things as a way of refining them. You can also use the technique of three amigos, where you have someone from business, a tester, and a developer. And everyone shares their view on what is a specific story or backlog item about. Why do we want to build it? How do we want to build it? How do we test it? Things like that. And probably it makes sense then to also discuss how do you communicate asynchronously, especially now in Corona times, because you might want to add details to what you were discussing later on, because maybe not all of the ideas were surfaced during the conversations that you had. So maybe use some internal tool, maybe Slack, Miro, Teams, whatever is that you're using in your company. But then you might want to move into sessions where you have some structure to discuss backlog items. You can use something as simple as lean coffee, which is a technique where you spend limited time amount on discussing some item. This is very good when you have a lot of items to refine and they are quite small already. So if maybe you're in a place where you are already moving fast, this is a nice technique to time box those conversations. And you can play the squid, which is you have a topic, and then for this topic, people are generating questions, and then you are discussing answers to those questions, and then based on those answers, you generate more questions, and you just go on like that until everything is clear. Something that you already mentioned, you can have an estimation session, maybe something like Fibonacci sequence, or maybe my favorite, which is 1 TFB or NFC, which is like the best estimation technique in the world. Highly recommended. It's just checking if it fits the sprint. One is, yes, it fits the sprint. This is too fucking big, which means that we need to break it down, and no fucking clue is like, yes, it's self-explanatory. Very nice estimation technique. You can even purchase cards for this technique. Then you can have a session where everyone writes given when thens if you are using, for example, BDD, SpecFlow, things like that. It makes sense to allow spikes to happen, just time box them to give people time to explore the solution. They can even do it in pairs, but this is also a refinement technique. You can agree on creating a one-pager for a feature, which is like a one-page short constrained description of what is it that we're doing. And as a team, you're just filling up this one-pager template. It makes sense to agree on your definition of ready. And whenever you're doing things like that, something that I would give as an experiment that you can try is decide who needs to the refinement meeting and allow people to opt out. So don't treat it like an event where everyone needs to be there always, all the time. So just give people opportunity to say, yeah, we're not really interested in this. We might be focusing on something else, because this gives your team flexibility. It's not like on every session of refinement, if you're doing it as a meeting, everyone needs to be there. And if you're working in the office, because most of this stuff you can do remotely, you can do a story walk where every story or feature, whatever it is that you're refining, is on a different poster in a different place in a room, and people just go from station to station, adding their understanding of what is this story about. It's cool because it's well suited for Corona times. People can still be socially distanced. They can keep 1.5 meter apart, as long as they are not more than 10 in one room. Then you can use techniques like this, which are very good for something like a higher level overview of something a bit more than just one story. So event storming, story mapping, impact mapping, these are all techniques where you look at the product backlog from higher level. So probably it's not something you do every week, but it makes sense to have an overview of what is this product all about. Then, if you are working with users, hopefully, maybe, then you can do something that Jakub, you mentioned, which is low fidelity prototype. It's an awesome technique where you take your marker and you just draw what you mean. And you can do that in many tools. You can also do that using Miro, for example. There are some cool templates for wireframing. Something similar is this one. It's fat marker sketch. The idea here is that you give fat markers or fat pens in Miro to people. So they don't go into details of how large is this. They are intended to do a fast sketch, rough sketch of what is it that they're thinking about. And this is the way where you can, as we call it, move at the right speed. So you don't go into details, but at the same time, you surface all the assumptions as soon as possible. Another thing is maybe you have real users and you want to create a persona or an empathy map for those users. That's also way of thinking about things that your team will be working on. Breadboarding is also a bit less known technique. I read about it in a book from one company that whose name just slipped my mind, but basically it's structuring the flow of user in your system or your application. And we will share some links where you can read more about this. This is a very cool technique. It reminds the electronics breadboard. So you don't focus on how this end solutions should look like and what is the color of the case, what is the knob, how does it look like. You just quickly gather some things together and test it this way. And you mentioned liberating structures. There's one that is called simple ethnography, which is a way to go and observe real users. So if you are working with real users, you can use this as a structure that to work with feedback from users. If you are interested in more things like this, there are 3 very cool articles about experiments. Each of those articles is like 10 different experiments that you can do with your teams. So it's even more ideas than what we just mentioned here. And if you want to read about any of those techniques in more detail, we've added also some links. Initially, the idea was to print it and present it on the visualizer. That's why these are QR codes, but still you can just scan them with your mobile from here. And yeah, get to know a bit more about all of those techniques. Shape Up is the name of the book where breadboarding was mentioned. It's a free book online. You can read it. So,
and you will share the link as well.
yes, and I will share the link to this so you can just have a reference. I've also mentioned something here, which is a cool exercise that you can do. It's called Draw Your Backlog. So you just sit down and think how your backlog is structured right now. Does it resemble the structure that we were talking about earlier? So small items at the top, large items at the bottom, or maybe there are only large items, or maybe the backlog is like this. So you have an idea of 20% of next sprint and there's nothing more. So it's a very cool, quick technique to give you an overview of what is the state of your product backlog. How do you imagine it looks like?